The following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
But I would say it's still a very exciting space. There's still a fair amount of innovation. I would say we're a little more subdued right now. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's okay to put your head down and go into a build phase.
Right. GRTiQ podcast.
We're like astronauts floating in the space of time.
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Anne Ahola Ward, co-founder and CEO of CircleClick Media, a digital marketing firm that focuses on growing startups and emerging tech companies. Anne's background is a unique blend of startups, business, and cutting-edge technology, which has fueled her passion for innovation and problem-solving across various industries. Anne is also the author of the SEO Battlefield, comprehensive guide to search marketing strategies. During this interview, Anne shares her journey into tech and the startup world, beginning with her work as a developer during the dot-com boom. She reflects on her experiences at Apple, where she fell in love with UI, UX, and SEO, and eventually led her to found CircleClick in 2009. Throughout our discussion, Anne discusses the evolution of SEO, how AI is reshaping the landscape, her unique perspectives on the Web3 space, including her work with blockchain and DeFi projects. We also explore the future of privacy and marketing, and Anne's belief in the potential for mass adoption of Web3 and crypto. We started the conversation with a discussion of Anne's background and where she's from.
Thank you so much for having me today. I am originally born in Toronto, Canada, province of Ontario, and then grew up in Houston, Texas, and have lived all over. From New York City, Newport Beach, San Francisco for the past decade, and I am back home in Austin since the pandemic.
Austin's one of those interesting city stories that I keep hearing about. It sounds like to me that like pre-pandemic and maybe a little bit during the pandemic, there was a large inflow of people into the Austin area. And I know tech is pretty sexy there. People are interested in building new tech. What can you tell us about Austin and sort of that story about this is sort of where people are moving?
Well, I mean, Austin is where I fell in love with startups. I was here during the dot-com boom. I was finishing my degree at University of Texas. So, it's where I fell in love with tech. So to me, that's, there's so much hardcore tech here. People don't realize how many headquarters there are. But I would say it's a good blend of big company and small. Every major tech company has a presence here. A huge presence from IBM, Tesla, most famously. Elon has moved in, but that's not Austin proper. That's Bastrop, a little further out. But yeah, there's quite a bit. There's more AI stuff happening here than I can keep up with, but that's okay. I like that. It's always good to stay on the edge, but I would say that it's a little more segmented than I was used to in San Francisco. Like it's not as hyper concentrated. So that blend is good because it brings dichotomy. But the bad part is that, you can't just go to an event and there's 100 startups you want to meet. It's going to be a mix of people from different industries. It's been my experience that it's a little more segmented here than it is in San Francisco, where everybody was tech. Everyone knew and understood what I did as an SEO and analytics. The waitress or the barista, they knew what SEO was. Here in Austin, it's a lot more mixed. You're going to get a mix of real estate, oil, all sorts of different industries. But I actually think that's good because at the end there, I was having trouble having conversations with people that didn't live in San Francisco. So what felt so unique and different and awesome, my perspective was a little skewed that I had a hard time relating to anyone outside of San Francisco. It's good for me to now feel comfortable talking to normal people again. I think that's a good thing. As a steward of technology, I should be able to mix it up with people that are not necessarily hyper-focused and concentrated on the same area I am.
As you mentioned, you went to university in Austin. You studied anthropology and business. And so I guess I got to start with this very basic question of like, are those fields more related than one might think, anthropology and business?
Absolutely. I used to joke in job interviews back when I did things like go to job interviews. I used to joke, oh, it's my degree's in monkey business. And it always got a laugh. But really what it was is I wasn't sure for a long time. And in anthropology was what I was interested in, which I didn't realize at the time was a good foundation for marketing, the studying of groups, group culture, what compels a group, what offends a group, folkways and mores, those sorts of things. I didn't realize that that was what I was doing. I was just doing what I thought was cool. I knew it was my major when I went to the first anthropology class, and the first homework we did was reading a book that compared Balinese cockfighting to American football. I was like, yes, this is my jam. But the business minor was just a sort of a fallback because I thought, okay, I don't know where this is going, but what I do now did not exist then. So it really was in the best way set me up, which is why I think university is a place to become educated. It's a place, you don't necessarily know what you're going to come out of it doing.
So how did you get started professionally after university? What did you do upon graduation?
Well, I was already working as a developer at a startup at night. It was the dot-com boom. So I was already working. I had a job as an HTML. My first job in tech was a night editor for a startup called iBooks.com. And I was doing a lot of reading of O'Reilly books because we were translating O'Reilly books into web format. But at the time, everyone mostly there were some LCD screens, but people were mostly using CRTs. So it was a great idea. Let's put books online to read them, but the tech wasn't quite there, right? So you're not going to read a book on a CRT. So I had a foundation there. And so that's kind of where my startup addiction started, and it just kind of kept rolling.
When you think back to that time in history, you talk about like the dot-com boom, and there's a lot of history books and papers about that period of time. When you think back to that, though, are there parallels that you draw with things we're seeing like the emergence of Web3 and blockchain, or even sort of parallel to that, something like AI? I mean, are you connecting dots where this feels bubblish or boomish or something different?
Oh, absolutely. We went from being nerds to gods. Everybody wanted to learn. I had friends asking me, how do I code? They wanted me to teach them to code overnight. No one previous to that cared. But yeah, I mean, the wave of emerging tech is the one that I have been surfing ever since, because emerging tech startups specifically are my passion, because they're where the most innovation and excitement is in technology. And, for a while it was AR and VR and this, before that, everything was Web 2.0. It still always has a way of feeling new. There are lessons you take from each one, but it always has a new something. But it's just funny to me when founders think, oh, no one's done this before. It's like, well, yeah, we did, but we just weren't as good at it, or, but it doesn't make me jaded. It makes me excited for what's next.
Is that how you sort of place something like Web3? And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later on, but do you see it as the emergence of new tech, or do you see it as an extension of like existing tech?
To me, Web3 is not new. I've worked in the space for over a decade. My agency was the first to take and accept Bitcoin as payment in San Francisco, and I can prove it. I put out a really weird little blog in 2014, but was doing work prior to that. And so it's not new. What's new is that we've got more social acceptance. There are more people focused on it. It's got more juice to it, even after what's happened the last few years, from Terra Luna and all the things that happened. It's still, I remember Mt. Gox, like we bounced back from that. So, your time in crypto is generally demarked by which scandal did you come in before or after. But it's still here and it's still ticking. I would say it's more exciting now because AI, Web3 really wanted to latch on to VR and AR, right? Like gaming. Those two worlds there were tracks at conferences that were kind of overlapping. And then AI sort of seems like the more foxy partner. So that has breathed new life into it yet again, which is also exciting because I think it should. I think this is a technology that will outlast us. No one knew, back in the early 90s when everything was kind of being formed and that we now accept, right? Like Google and Adobe and, no one knew that centralization was going to be the boogeyman.
So if we go back to your career, you got started during university working in startups, fell in love with that bleeding tech sort of environment. And talk to us about sort of your career then. How did it take shape from being a developer to moving into expertise in marketing, SEO, and analytics?
It was very specifically in my time at Apple. I was a developer designer in Apple Education Enterprise Marketing. That is where I fell in love with analytics, SEO, UI, UX, all of the fun happening on the front of a web page versus the back end. That was the last full-on developer job I ever had. And one of the last few actual jobs I had, because it just was sort of like, well, we were one click off of the Apple main page, off of Apple Education. And you would make one tiny change and you would see just thousands of things happen in analytics. And that was just sort of a world-class education I could not have paid for. And this is way cooler. I was there at the launch of iTunes and just a really exciting time. And I knew that was the party for me because other things had happened, like Dreamweaver had come out, the tools to build code, for websites had, because I was a web dev. So the tools they were kind of out there to build. And I thought, well, this is not as fun now. You could just make a website if you want to make a website.
What was it like working at Apple during that period of time? I mean, if I'm kind of mapping it in my brain to the history of what Apple accomplished, that's pretty much a pivot point in history there.
Yes, absolutely. It was very exciting. It was thrilling, actually. I had my little iPod and it shifted my thinking in a lot of ways about what the internet was going to become. I was doing what later became named as influencer marketing. We didn't have a name for it at that point. So we had a community that we built a PHP customized bulletin board system for all these educators. And it was awesome. It was the Apple Distinguished Educator Program, which still exists to this day. And so they would give us content. We would repackage it. It was just like an amazing machine of innovation. And I mean, you want to see how ideas get put together and come into play and how things creatively actually happen on that level is just the brand guide I remember was 30 something pages of this headline is in this font and this is the spacing of this font. There's a very good reason why when you think about Apple, there's a very clear image in your head. And that, again, how could I do anything else? It was like, okay, this is my life now. And that really became my passion, was using, and it took a minute because SEO didn't really as a job exist quite yet. So I would get hired to do marketing and I would end up building the site. And they'd be like, do SEO too. And I'm like, well, that's a separate job. And it took a long time, which is ultimately why I went out on my own.
Well, in addition to going out on your own in 2017, you wrote a book titled The SEO Battlefield, Winning Strategies for Search Marketing Programs. Talk to us about that book and sort of the nature of SEO. So I think the question is, why did you decide to develop expertise in SEO? And for listeners that may not be familiar with sort of what that is, can you introduce it to us?
So I went out on my own in 2009 because I would go into a startup. I would build out a beautiful program. I'd build them a lead machine. I'd train the staff. I would hire the right team and get it going. And then they would say, okay, thanks. Thanks, senior, manager. We don't need you. And I realized that a lot of organizations did not see SEO as a full-fledged, full-time effort. A lot of organizations thought it was something like an oil change. And so I realized I'd be better off on my own. I had a former boss tell me, I don't know why you're not doing this on your own. You have the talent. And so I started my agency in 2009. And it was at first, I did everything, because you do when you start a business. But then I learned that my passion specifically was in the organic side, because I like growing things. I like using data to make better decisions. And so taking that experience and applying it for different startups in different industries became sort of what I was really good at. And I could attack different people's problems, and I eat their problems and I spit them out. It's been a fun game because I'm like a shark. I'm constantly moving. And that excites me. And it still excites me. And I got to be honest, SEO was sort of boring a few years ago. It was getting boring. And I think AI really spiced it up. So it's a profession that continues to change, which has increased over time my passion for it.
What's the state of SEO then today? And I'll sort of provide some context for listeners who, again, may not be 100% familiar with this. But when I was first introduced to it, this was a while ago, it just was keyword, and there was some, black hat, white hat type tactics that you could use to sort of drive traffic. And then the algorithm got better. And then it was about staying up to date as best you could on what Google is doing to update the algorithm. And then it became seemed like a losing proposition. How do you stay ahead of the curve on this and actually win in SEO? And so that was my personal experience with it. I'm sure that it's very idiosyncratic to what I experienced, but talk to us about the state of SEO and sort of your experience with that.
Well, I mean, every few years I read how it's dead. And, how there's a tool that does it for us. And there's all this other sort of stuff. And here I am just chugging along, knowing that that's wrong. I would say right now is probably as long as there is search, there will be SEO. As long as there are people using whatever interface, it doesn't have to be a search engine. It can be the App Store. It can be, any number of places. It could be a voice assistant in your home. It doesn't matter. As long as there is search, there will be SEO. As long as there's a place to be found, there will be people gunning to have you found and competing for attention. And the same with SEM. There's always going to be, and we do paid too, but I don't personally anymore, but I oversee it. And I would say that right now, people are questioning it more than they have in a very long time. And that's because they believe that AI is, either going to replace it, it's going to make it different. It's like we just discussed earlier. It's a repackaging of something old that feels new. The AI overview, that's rolled out to like 18-20% of search in Google now. It's really just the culmination of Google answers. Those little questions you see, and you hit the carrot and the carrot shows you the answer. It's really not that much different from that. Yes, okay, there are a little bit differences. It's repackaged, right? But I would also say SEO has known and lived with AI since probably the mid to late 2000s. Ever since the advent of the PageRank algorithm, right? And that would have been in the early 2000s. The PageRank algorithm was our first introduction to, whoa, this is production level AI. So we've been using AI for a very long time, especially in our phones and other capabilities. It's just we're now aware of it, talking about it, and using it ourselves. And so, it got more sophisticated in the mid 2010s. That's when, we saw natural language processing. That's when we saw machine learning, and things kind of switched to understanding of user intent. The sophistication level upped, and a lot of people left after that. So it's just like crypto. You got to get on and get off when the ride is right for you. But I'd say as far as today, we're on the heels of high quality content generation at the hands of AI, but that does not by any means mean that SEO is over. It just means that the game has changed again.
The GRTiQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTiQ, and thank you for listening. Listeners who enjoy this content can help support the GRTiQ podcast by leaving a review or a 5-star rating wherever they download podcasts, by sharing episodes on social media, or by simply telling a friend or colleague about something they heard or learned from one of our guests. It's support from listeners like you that make it possible for us to keep shining a light on the people and stories behind Web3 and the graph.
Roger that.
If the game is changing, but the rules are sort of still in play, meaning like just basic SEO hygiene and tactics are still relevant, what are those? I mean, if you just sort of canvas those for listeners who are interested, what is basic SEO hygiene from your perspective as someone with deep expertise?
So there are different types of SEOs. There's no actual, and I talk about this in my book, there's no like, oh, I'm an SEO certified. There's no certifications. It's all sort of like, this is the hat that I wear and I've chosen to wear it. So there are different types of us. There's content SEOs, there's social SEOs, there's people from different backgrounds that say they're SEOs because they took a course or they read a book. And that's okay. I am a technical SEO. So my focus is, because I'm a former developer, so my focus is on performance. So a really basic metric is core web vitals. So Google has given us the framework that they expect for our performance. LCP, largest contentful paint. How long until on a phone, I'm looking at the phone and I'm getting the full blush of what's on the page. That should be under 2 seconds. Those metrics are unbelievably hard if you're using a CMS system. If you're using like WordPress, which still half the web does, by the way, or like 40%. Your performance tuning is constant. So, the tools are easy to use to measure. Oh, we're heat mapping this and we're tracking this. Well, guess what? You're slowing yourself down. So there's all sorts of bells and whistles to that people don't realize. But there's also the page performance, right? So people are clicking off. Why are they clicking off? Why don't people want to click my learn more button? Why don't people want to do this? I could do a whole rant on learn more. I hate that call to action. It's like the laziest. I always tell my clients, it's the one that comes with the template. It has no informational scent. It's lazy. We could do better. We could do better as marketers. But what I focus on before anything else, before the fun stuff like campaigns, I focus on technical performance. Are we giving people what they want in a way they understand and as quickly as possible? And if we're not doing that, why? And how do we do that?
So is it your position that like, if we think about modern day marketing and clearly like digital marketing arose, and now you've got this need for conventional, traditional thinking about marketing coupled with this approach or tactics suitable for digital, then you've got this like specialization, I would imagine, I don't know how you would frame it, of like SEO, but how do you sort of think about modern marketing and how you bundle in things like SEO and other sort of specializations? Should every team have an SEO specialist? Should they always outsource? Like, talk to us through that.
I don't think that SEOs should be in-house. And I am an agency owner and SEO out of that's whatever, but the truly best paid and organic search people are not house cats. They're alley cats. I'm an alley cat. I wander. I want to go from project to project doing cool stuff. I'm constantly curious. My morning is spent reading news, blogs, curated information on the industry, people I like in the industry. I'm constantly consuming information so that I can be on the absolute razor's edge of what's happening in terms of performance. If you're in-house as an SEO, you're probably getting dragged into meetings all day and you're probably doing newsletters. And there's a good place for that. Newsletters are awesome. I like the traffic from email. Email traffic typically is like good quality traffic, but it's general marketing. But SEO is a big umbrella. And I think true actual SEO is a small subset of that, but everything working together in tandem is truly like the best program, the lead machine that every startup wants. They all have to work in concert. And so I think that leads to a lot of confusion.
Let's talk about your experience in the startup world or universe and ask you a couple questions about the nature of startups. So based on your experiences, both as like somebody building on a startup team and then maybe someone coming in with marketing, SEO expertise and folding into a team, what have you learned about the nature of startups? Like what makes a startup successful? What increases the odds of success? Do you have any insights on some of those key lessons?
Absolutely. I think what makes a startup the most successful is a definite aptitude for learning and a willingness to be wrong. A CEO that doesn't need to sit in every meeting, a CEO that learns that his power comes from empowering others, not from holding all the cards, from building teams, not relying on star performers. That core team, and we just saw this with OpenAI, by the way, this last week. When you have that core team, it's like a snake shedding its skin. You have to grow and be able to grow and move. And to do that, sometimes you have to say goodbye to people so that you can grow. And that's something that a lot of startups are afraid to do. They'll leave that co-founder around that doesn't really have a place anymore, who just sort of gums up the works. That's another thing is it also keeps new people from feeling like they're in the inner circle. So I think avoiding nepotism, avoiding hiring your friends. And also, if you're over 5 employees or staff, get an HR consultant so that there is someone who can have safe reporting instead of just the CEO. Because I've seen a lot of startups fail because of HR-related problems because they didn't know to hire a consultant or have some mechanism where people could report problems and feel heard. Oftentimes, they just want to feel heard. And again, that's also learning, right? So are we open to learning? Why didn't we succeed on that campaign? Let's figure out and do better next time versus, well, that was my campaign. It was a good campaign. I've had CMOs do that and deny that the data is saying, like I've shown CMOs, here's the data, you got 4 clicks. And they were like, no. I know. Cause it's like they have tunnel vision towards their own personal success and ego. And so being humble enough to learn from the data and see what it's showing you is a recipe for success every time.
Are there any brands or content producers that you think sort of represent the gold standard for SEO? I mean, somebody that we could sort of go click on or look at and say, oh yeah, I see that this really is a high bar.
There are a ton of great sites and great brands who do a fantastic job of kind of roping you in. I would say in terms of news, my favorite is The Verge. I absolutely love Casey. They do a really good job of keeping their finger on the pulse of what's happening in tech. I find them more relevant even than TechCrunch these days. There's a newsletter I follow I also really like called Garbage Day, which is really succinct information about internet trends. Like this newsletter has single-handedly kept me up on Chapel Roan, which I didn't even know who that was until this all blew up. And so internet trends, internet culture, which is important to me as someone who has a team that's putting out social posts, right? Like we need to know what to avoid. What is brat? What are these things? I have to look up. And so I would say the brand that has really surprised me in terms of content creation is going to surprise you. It's Nutter Butter on TikTok. Follow Nutter Butter on TikTok and watch their last 3 videos, and it will blow your mind that this is corporate marketing. This is where we are today. It's scary and fascinating. Their Halloween stuff. Oh my God. Wow. Who gave these people free reign and why is this where we are? It's just as an internet marketer, my mind is blown by this brand and in a good way, but in a scary way too, because I'm like, is this my future? The fear is always oh, am I going to be old? Or, oh, is this, am I not going to understand anymore? But I think by curating really good information. And having smart people around you, you can certainly stay relevant and stay informed. But those are some of my favorites.
With CircleClick and you get embedded with these marketing teams, you work alongside a CMO and an existing team, but you bring your expertise. My question is, how often do you find that like the marketing function is doing all the fundamentals? I always kind of say basic blocking and tackling, simple stuff. There's a lot of statistics that like most marketing teams just aren't even sort of doing that function. They're not meeting even the lowest sort of threshold of good marketing hygiene. Are you finding the same, or are you usually like, no, these generally marketing function is doing what it should do, and we're just kind of accretive to that?
People don't generally call me because things are going awesome, so keep in mind, I'm like called in to save companies that aren't making money, or, my favorite is post-angel, pre-series A, like getting ready for the big dance, and we've got to look grown up now. And how do there was one guy who did that, but he left, and where's this? And, I don't have access to that account. There's a lot of that with those types of startups, but that's okay. You get past that, you get to the good stuff. It's like the old adage, if you release the product and there's no bugs, you released it too late. It's kind of the same thing with internet marketing. You're not really on the razor's edge of things if, you're focused on, well, did we get that product blog out this week? You know what I mean? You kind of you're operating in a just-in-time environment. So the rules for startups are very different than for, post-series A, post-series B sort of startups where they have to have that basic stuff. I think the younger ones don't. I think that they've all broken the rules. They don't have fully fleshed out websites. They don't have all the sorts of things. I haven't seen a company get on Facebook and have a Facebook page in a while. That used to be like where you started. So what you need also is constantly changing. So I think the rules of that have changed. And I think that's okay. But I never fault anyone for not knowing what they're doing and not being prepared. They've done the good job of calling me.
Makes sense. As you mentioned, in 2009, you founded CircleClick. It's a digital marketing agency. Talk to us about the vision of CircleClick and sort of who you serve and what the target market is for that agency.
The definite vision is to grow startups by any means necessary. I have been an ad hoc booth babe. I have been, a spokesperson. I have been in every role to grow startups. And, what I generally look for is who's doing something that's a challenger. I like challenger brands that challenge the status quo, challenge a big competitor that deserves to be unseated, or challenges our notions of reality of how we're doing things in our own lives, changing the world. That definitely compels me. And that tends to be in emerging tech.
You mentioned earlier, and we sort of talked about it before we pushed record, that you have been interested in Web3, and I'm sure your agency has sort of worked adjacent to or directly with Web3. How has your experience sort of seeing the emergence of Web3 and brands and marketing in that industry shifted or adjusted your view of like traditional Web2 type marketing? Has it?
It's always been very different. I worked in and around crypto for a long time, over a decade. I would say where it really got interesting was probably the ICO rush, like 2016-ish was when things got kind of crazy. And it was like, oh yeah, we got to have this Telegram that's got a bajillion people in it. You've got to have this many Twitter followers. You've got to have, here are these 200 listings you have to be on and sponsor to look like your coin is going to be like the hottest, or, whatever your pre-launch stuff, right? That was a very different playbook to me the first few projects I did. And the MVP is, the ICO horse is still one of my favorite examples of what it's like to work in the space. But it was very interesting to me, the emphasis of Twitter followers, the emphasis of this directly being tied to company revenue, because it was. And so it's a completely different playbook, and it still is today. There are things that are common, right? But, it's its own beast. For that reason, I definitely have loved my time in the space because it's very different. Depending on like where you started and where you're incorporated, you can and cannot say certain things on your public website. You may have, a foundation you're starting from versus there's all sorts of nuances to it that have made it very interesting to me. And I did a lot of work last few years in DeFi. I found that to be a more interesting vertical for a lot of reasons. I think banking needs to be disrupted. I love the idea of programmable money, but my goodness, so many rules. So many rules that you don't even, having to get legal approval on tweets is something I hadn't done in a long time, but it's something that some startups have to do.
You've written about sort of the evolution of SEO and emerging trends, especially as it relates to privacy. Clearly, privacy is a huge part of the Web3 ethos. How do you reconcile SEO and standard playbooks to user engagement and driving traffic with this environment where, sometimes the user is just a wallet address? It's hard to know kind of who and what they are. You can't really put them into the funnel. How do you think through some of that?
I've had projects where they won't use like server-side analytics. They won't use Google Analytics. They won't use any tool from a big company. I've had a few projects like that where we're not allowed to use any of the standard tracking tools because we don't want the information. We don't want to even collect the user data. And those are very fun for me because I'm basing what I say we do on my hunches and on my experience. And, those are gut moves, not based on data. You kind of have to work around it. Like, okay, well, we're going to put this out on Twitter, but we're going to use a UTM parameter, and then I will track it and I will keep the data and you will never see the data. Like, you kind of have to have a sacred trust, and I can't violate NDA, but I would say that there are quite a few crypto startups that are conscious of these things, and for good reason, right? They don't want to be a target. They don't want to, by hackers or by the government. And so I think that there's always a layer of complication there, but that to me makes it kind of almost more fun because you're judging things on external things like, well, we got 50 retweets on that. We cooked up this many followers, the things you can track from a social platform. But I do think that privacy is something that we're not even thinking about anymore because we're just so used to not having it. So I always want to help people who are trying to reclaim it. Our digital.
We talk about sort of a new game with Web3 and marketing, and you've already articulated sort of why that's the case. It's a challenge to conventional approaches, but my question is it also an opportunity to sort of unlock new ways for brands to engage with and participate with people interested in the protocol or the Web3 project? I mean, I guess my question is like, does Web3 open up or unlock new ways of marketing and brand engagement?
Absolutely. I mean, we saw it at South by Southwest a couple years ago where everybody, had to download the wallet to get the NFTs. NFTs were, pretty interesting ones like Dolly Parton, like get her album if you download this. And so I know people that would have never cared about NFTs or any of that who were compelled by the carrot of, well, this could be original art that I own, or this could be a ticket to see Dolly Parton live in concert for free. The giveaways, I think, make it really exciting. I would say airdrops, I've seen some bad stuff happen with airdrops. So I'm a little biased against those. And I think they've fallen out of fashion to a large extent in recent years. But I do think it's a lot more interesting because you're painting a reality that most people don't even experience. They're taking what's handed to them versus forging a new path. So that's what makes the space, no matter how painful it is sometimes, that's what makes it worth it to me to stay in.
And I guess my last question on Web3 would just be this question about optimism. I mean, are you optimistic about the future of Web3? Are there reasons or concerns you have that sort of give you pause on this experiment we're watching?
I don't consider it an experiment because I've been working in and around it for over a decade. I think it's here to stay. I think it's whether or not mass consumers, mass scale, zeitgeist, all that's really going to keep happening. I would say consumer interest is waning. But my concern about labeling myself and being a public advocate is very clear, is that women who are outspoken in this space become targets. And so I actually am very low key about my work in this space because I don't want to have my Instagram hacked. I've had my account cloned several times, and the clones always are trying to sell Bitcoin. So it does not benefit me at all to be a public advocate of crypto, although I have spoken at conferences and I've talked about it on TV. I do think that my advocacy has, if anything, I've pulled back my public support for that reason, just because of what I've seen some of my girlfriends go through and other things. But that danger is still looming. But I would say it's still a very exciting space. There's still a fair amount of innovation. I would say we're a little more subdued right now, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's okay to put your head down and go into a build phase. You know, the old bull and bear. And I think it'll come back again. I think people that never would have cared about crypto got excited for NFTs, and that excitement can travel on. I think we still have a lot of work to do. I would call it cautious optimism because I think there are real problems that we're solving. But it for most general consumers, at least in North America, it's not money.
As you said a couple of times, a lot of your expertise and your experiences in driving growth for startups, and that growth challenge is very difficult for any organization, let alone a startup. When you think about growth, like how do you sort of approach that? I don't know if you have a formula or a template that you sort of rely on, but it would be interesting to hear how you sort of approach or solve for growth with early stage startups.
There's absolutely no one size fits all. Generally, every program is different. I could have grown a super mega huge agency had I wanted to, but I didn't because I want to work on the projects that I have in my portfolio. So I'm on every client. I work on every account, some more than others, but I do that because I do think that that's, something that's important to me personally, just because I think that each has its own playbook, because each has its own set of challenges. What a lead or a sale is very different to each one. So how could the approach be similar? The similarities or the common things that I do in the beginning are obviously studying competitors. We learn a lot from our competitors. I always love it when a founder tells me we have no competitors. You absolutely do. Google thinks you do. There's only been one or two exceptions to that in 15 plus years, but it was not for good reason. I think that data analysis and correlation is also another step. A lot of companies, that especially that use GA4 didn't really customize it at all. It's a much, much, much different beast than universal analytics. And so, ensuring that the data is good, those sorts of basics always happen. I always do performance testing, like how slow are we? How fast are we? Those sorts of things are like your entry level. Those are always similar. There's very few clients that come to me and say, well, we know our data is good. That's not really a thing I hear much.
For listeners who want to learn more about CircleClick and the things you're working on, what's the best way for them to sort of learn more and engage with the brand that you're building?
Absolutely. I am all over the internet. You can find me at my online moniker, which is Annebot, ANNEBOT. I'm Annebot at a lot of things. My company is all over there too, CircleClick Media. We're everywhere that search happens.
Well, Anne, now we've reached a point in the podcast where I'm going to ask you the GRTiQ 10. These are 10 questions I ask each guest of the podcast every week. It's a fun way to sort of aggregate insights and lessons from guests that have joined over the years. And I also ask it because I think it gives listeners the opportunity to learn something new, try something different, or achieve more in their own life. So are you ready for the GRTiQ 10?
Yeah, I appreciate your pristine data collection.
The GRTiQ 10.
This is the way.
10 questions for astronauts floating in space.
This is the way.
What book or article has had the most impact on your life?
I'd say it's a book called Reverence, Renewing a Forgotten Virtue by Dr. Paul Woodruff.
Is there a movie or a TV show that you would recommend everybody should watch?
Murder, She Wrote was pivotal to me in my young life. Taught me that the female lead is normal. And honestly, it's just safe, fun entertainment.
If you could only listen to one music album for the rest of your life, which one do you choose?
Station to Station by David Bowie.
What's the best advice someone's ever given to you?
My mother told me when I couldn't figure out what my major was, and it had changed a bajillion times my freshman year. She said, just follow what interests you. I spent the rest of my life doing it.
What's one thing you've learned in your life that you don't think most other people have learned or know quite yet?
You're better than you think you are.
What's the best life hack you've discovered for yourself?
Never assume the worst. If you start doing that, you'll eventually be right.
And then, Anne, based on your own life experiences and observations, what's the one habit or characteristic that you think best explains how people find success in life?
The commonality between founders that I have seen is resilience. Not that they're afraid to fail, but knowing that they have failed and getting back up and getting out there again. Resilience is something that in life benefits everybody.
And then, and the final three questions are complete the sentence type questions. The first one is, the thing that most excites me about the future of Web3 is?
Mass adoption.
And how about this? If you're on X, I still call it Twitter, you should be following?
VCs who congratulate themselves.
And lastly, I'm happiest when?
I'm walking my dogs.
The GRTiQ 10.
And I show you how deep the
And this was a lot of fun to get to know you and to hear a little bit about your experience into tech in an important part of the United States, at least, because we have listeners all across the world in Austin, where a lot of technology and startups are happening, and your experiences at Apple, along with your expertise in SEO. So thank you for sharing your story and sharing so much. Again, for listeners that want to stay in touch with you, follow the things you're working on, what's the best way for them to stay in touch?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm Annebot, ANNEBOT.
This has been a production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review. GRTiQ Podcast.